Mr. President, ladies and gentlemen, Sir Godfrey Newbold Hounsfield. He was a pioneer not only of the medical imaging and the CT that we've heard so much about today, but also about in the early days of computers. He is recognised in many areas for his help and his work in those fields. He won many awards. He was a Fellow of the Royal Society, Nobel Prize winner, and got a knighthood. But he remained modest and unassuming as a person. Godfrey was born on the 28th of August 1919. And you can see him here, there, sitting on his mother's lap with two of his brothers, Paul and Michael, and one of his sisters, Joan. His other elder sister, Molly, is not in the picture. This other picture shows him in 1935, when he would have been about 16, just before he left school. Godfrey, from an early age, was actually full of fun. He enjoyed all sorts of activities with his family. Godfrey is the one holding the mudguard on the right, while his brother Paul does the handstand. Paul was very fond of collecting old motorbikes, and it was Godfrey, the younger brother, who actually repaired them all and kept them running. You might think from that Godfrey was practical, good at school, good at maths, good at science. Well, in fact, it's very far from that, as his school report from just before he left school shows. He was reported as intellectually retarded. This was actually the second time that there had been such an issue. Some 2 years earlier, he'd actually been moved down from the A form to the B form for non-performance. But many of his friends at school, some of whom are still alive, recall that he wasn't actually retarded. He was actually really quite bright. He sat about in the middle of the form. But he enjoyed other things outside the school. He enjoyed making rockets, taking things like water and carbide and exposing them to air, which makes them rather explosive. Well, his first experiment, which was with a syrup tin with a cocoa tin inside it, he claimed later in life shot up to about 80 foot. But he wasn't happy with that, so he then did a second experiment using a tar barrel and a water trough at his father's farm, because he grew up on a farm. Well, his father wasn't very happy when the water trough was completely destroyed. But he also enjoyed, even in those early days, dismantling farm equipment, learning how it worked, taking it to bits. That was a trait that he kept for most of his life. His nephew, Andrew Hounsfield, recalls recently that only a few years before Godfrey died, he was still going there and taking bits of equipment on the farm to bits. Andrew then had to get them back together again. But Godfrey enjoyed all sorts of activities. He would say in his autobiography that, in fact, in the village there were few distractions and no pressures to join in at a ball game or go to the cinema. He recalled there wasn't a cinema in the village. Well, in fact, there was. This building was where Godfrey and a friend of his actually ran a small cinema, showing films every Friday and Saturday. In 1939, with the outbreak of war, Godfrey joined the RAF Reserves. And initially, he was working in maintenance units, salvaging parts from crashed aircraft. We assume, in fact, that probably he was quite good at getting certain parts, such as radio parts, to work again, because he trained himself in the radio area and moved on to work on radar from 1942 to 46. Initially at RAF Cranwell as an instructor, but he also worked at RAF Whiten, which is where some of the Pathfinder squadrons were based. Before the war, he had actually shown some interest in music and had taught himself the piano. And you can actually see him here on the right playing the double bass in an RAF jazz band. At the end of the war, one of the people who had been head of the units he'd worked under, Air Vice Marshal John Cassidy, identified him as somebody he would sponsor and recommend he go to Faraday House, which was the Institution of Electrical Engineers, his own school at the time. And Godfrey got a grant to go there. Unfortunately, the course that he did there didn't actually teach him that much more about maths, nor much about electronics. And in fact, nearly everything that he used in later life was either self-taught, intuitive, or done by investigation. After his course at Faraday House, Godfrey joined EMI on the 10th of October 1949. You may read in a lot of places, in his Nobel acceptance speech, and in many other places, that Godfrey said, "I joined EMI in 1951. In fact, we know that can't be true, because one of his early patent records was in 1950. Also, here he is actually receiving his 25-year award in 1974. But that was typical of Godfrey. It wasn't important. It wasn't an important fact to be absolutely accurate on whether it was 1949 or 1951. About the same time as Godfrey joined EMI, he joined the Ramblers and the InterVarsity Club. He enjoyed rambling, he loved walking, and he loved socialising with different people. He also joined other groups, one called the Merry-Go-Round, and got involved in various activities with a number of these, including a rather interesting tug-of-war in a boat. I hope you can actually see the string, the rope that's being held there by Joanne Irvin as they try to row in this tug-of-war. I don't know who won. Godfrey also had a love or hate relationship, perhaps, with cars. He continuously had different breakdowns, ran out of petrol, got stuck in the Ford. Now this didn't happen just once, it happened many times. Godfrey, I love this picture because he's standing there, still with his jacket and tie on, but with his trousers rolled up, trying to repair the car, stuck in this Ford. During his time at EMI, Godfrey first of all worked on radar, which is logical from the work that he'd been doing during the war, and then moved on to computers, and did a lot of pioneering work on the early EMIDEC computers. He moved on, with those computers, he moved on to working specifically on the memory storage, particularly when he finished with the EMIDEC project. The memory store project that he was working on was overtaken by new technologies coming along. And two of the people who were at the head of the central research laboratories at the time debated with this project over what do we do with Godfrey. Well, they had a project working on trying to do some very early character recognition. And they thought, well, let's have a look at that. And Bill Ingham, who was head of CRL at the time, Central Research Laboratories, recalls saying, well, I said, Godfrey's bound to come up with something. Little did they know. So Godfrey started on early ideas of how to recognise a pattern, a character. But he moved on from that to look at how to look inside a box. He wasn't satisfied with just trying to look at a character on a page. He wanted, if I have a box, can I take a lot of readings from around that box and work out what is inside the box? At this stage, there was no concept of it being anything medical. It could have been a book, it could have been a box of sweets. But he already was starting to think that one approach was actually to work in slices, to look at it in slices. And his very, very early notebooks show that he was looking in ways to almost back project some of the data. Godfrey, at that time, had a lot of ideas. There was a lot of enthusiasm. but there was very, very little money. People keep saying that, well, you know, this project must have had money. Well, it didn't. The lathe bed unit, which Adrian referred to earlier, which is sitting at the moment at the British Institute for Radiology's library, had here an X-ray tube, a detector, and a brain specimen, a pickled brain specimen, which Godfrey had managed to get hold of. But this whole thing, the reason it's called the lathe bed, is because it had been built with bits lying around the laboratory on an old lathe bed, which he had left over from his previous computer memory project. And if it hadn't been for the support of people like Cliff Gregory and Gordon Higson, shown here, later photographed with Godfrey in 1993, but in the early days, those two people from the Department of Health were the ones who gained faith in it and enabled him to get what little money he did to get the project going. The first images from this, as Adrian showed earlier, were very primitive. There was even a picture, which we decided last week was actually of a piglet, where the intestines of the piglet have been removed, a bowl of water has been put in there with a perspex E. Godfrey had hoped that we'd be able to put the letters EMI in there, but there wasn't space. That October, 1st of October, Jamie Ambrose took the first clinical scan. Perhaps, as a digression again, interesting that that scanner, and as Adrian said, it was a straight leap from the lathe bed to this, was made for £69,000. All the development work, all the design work. And that was just over half what they were commercially selling the units for at £120,000. You couldn't do that today. The first announcement of those images, not only did Godfrey and Jamie jump up and down like footballers scoring a winning goal, but even more so, the surgeon who operated on this very first patient came out and said, it looks exactly like the image. But Godfrey was still sceptical. He was sceptical at the first patient. He thought, you know, is this a fluke? I've had this before. Something works well the first time. And it wasn't until he'd done about 6 or 7 patients that he was convinced that it actually would work. The result of all this was that Godfrey won a number of awards. The first major one was the McRoberts Award in the UK in 1972, worth £25,000. That was more than Sir John Reed, the then chairman of EMI, was earning as his salary. Publicity continued. We heard earlier reference to James Bull. Well, the first visit Godfrey did to the States was in May 1972 with James Bull, and then in that following November he attended the RSNA, presenting the equipment and talking to people with Jamie Ambrose. I'm fascinated by the small size of the EMI stand at RSNA. No company would have one that small now. But this led to more and more awareness, more and more awards internationally. He won the Albert Lasker Clinical Award in the US in 1975, and over the following 2 years he won more than 24 other awards. Perhaps the most prestigious award he won was the Nobel Prize in 1979 in Physiology or Medicine, which he shared with Alan Cormack. As Adrian showed, Godfrey, although his early work had always been aimed at sort of looking at the head, in his very early books was this sketch, which actually showed that he was already, from a very early time, thinking about body scanning. Body scanning and the standing ovation he got for presenting his own body image at the first International Conference on CT in Bermuda in March 1975 gave us the CT 5000, which went into Northwick Park the Mayo, the Mallinckrodt, and to centres like Manchester, where Professor Ian Isherwood recalled seeing the impact, being able to look at a CT scan that looked just like an anatomical slice. To us today, that doesn't sound very stunning, but in those days it was something really quite stupendous. Godfrey continued working on CT throughout the late 1970s and into the 80s, working with his team both on the Topaz scanner with its unique flying focal spot that Adrian referred to, the MI7070. But these were far more complex. The early scanners, as we've heard, used standard components. They used bits that we could cannibalize from somewhere else. These required specialist components to be made for them, and that in its turn brought a lot of problems and challenges for Godfrey. Not of his making, but problems for him to solve, which he enjoyed. He also continued to get recognition. He met Prince Philip, the Duke of Edinburgh, on an occasion, obviously enjoying something amusing here, but far more serious and wondering. I did ask Steve Bates, who was around on Friday, whether he knew what they were talking about there, but he can't recall. He also met the Queen on a number of occasions, including in 1977 at the British Genius exhibition. And on more than 2 occasions he visited Buckingham Palace, including to receive his CBE and in 1981 to receive his knighthood. Godfrey enjoyed a wide variety of things. He enjoyed his work, and many people who worked with him remember him from sitting in the corner of a laboratory, working very long hours, even with a camp bed in the lab to sleep in if he needed to. But he also enjoyed his music, playing music, as I said earlier. He was also dabbled in painting. These are some of his painting different interpretations of one particular image. He enjoyed being sociable, and here actually during a trip to America to actually try and solve some problems on the 7070. He's at a friend and colleague Dave King's with Richard Waltham. Godfrey did actually retire, or at least in theory he did, in 1984. Along with receiving the obligatory gold clock, his long-term assistant, Audrey Lester, is here holding a micrometer and hacksaw blade. Those are actually very significant, because some years earlier, in about 1977, Tony Williams, one of his colleagues, had drawn this cartoon. It's inspired by Godfrey's style of improvising engineering. And the caption read, "It is amazing what can be done with a hacksaw and micrometer." And I think it is, because the early days of CT, most things were being done on the back of an envelope and on finding scraps to get it working. But in fact, Godfrey did continue working after his retirement. I've even got a patent application here of his of 1991. But he also continued going and about once a week visited the Brompton Hospital to work on MRI. He's working with, here, Professor David Firmin there. He would work very long hours. He would take data home at night, and then he'd set his alarm for every 2 hours so that he would wake up to reset the experiment he had running on his computer at home and come in the next visit with the answers to the Brompton. But he enjoyed working and thought in a different way. David Firmin remembers that he always described certain aspects of MRI in an anti-clockwise direction, while Godfrey thought in a clockwise direction. And Godfrey never used the standard terminology, so anybody talking to him had to be able to sort of work rather like working in a foreign language. But everything was a degree of fun, even to the extent of enjoying the Bromptons' Christmas parties with the turkey being served there, and continued to enjoy trips with the different social groups he was part of to the Loire. I would have loved to have been the person lying there being fed cherries by Godfrey. But in looking at Godfrey, we have to remember we've heard so much today about how CT has helped and how it's changed medicine, not only just the diagnostics that we've been talking about a lot today, but also the whole aspect of areas like surgery, oncology, therapy planning, all of those. And I suspect tomorrow when Willie Callender talks, he'll make us realise just how much there's still a lot more to come. But we are still talking in the medical world. We have to perhaps remember that CT has also had an impact in other areas, not only in the veterinary area, but also in looking at things like helicopter blades and other non-destructive tests. The future has got a lot to hold, and I think there will be a lot forward. But I have a lot of memories. I have a lot of different memories of Godfrey. Some of them are slightly more challenging than others. I remember having an argument with him fairly early on in the CT 70 days when we had an artefact on a scan and we asked Godfrey could he help us work out what it was, and he said, well, it's a blanket. And we said, no, the patient didn't have a blanket. But Godfrey was always right. But as many people who worked with him would say, he wasn't always right. I also remember travelling to the 2002 event 10 years ago, this conference, which was the last time he was able to attend the Hounsfield lecture in his name. And the late Neil Ridyard and I drove Godfrey up and back. And Neil spent the whole journey up and back arguing, or perhaps I should say ardently debating with Godfrey on different aspects of MRI, CT and other scientific principles. Things have changed. I'm not sure what Godfrey would actually have made of us sitting here celebrating 40 years of CT. He was a very modest person and probably would have preferred to have been in the background. What I do know is that he didn't like the celebrity status, and money wasn't important to him, although he won a number of awards. He would say it was never too late to do something useful, and never ever give up. He would certainly say, as he did but set by example, work all hours, but make sure that you have time for people. When speaking to younger people, he would certainly say, as Nigel Kahn reminded us earlier, that exams don't count. And in fact, when he was speaking to his previous school at the opening of a library in his name, he used the phrase, each new discovery brings with it seeds of other future inventions. And there are many discoveries, probably just around the corner, waiting for someone to bring them to life. Could this possibly be you? In closing, I'd just like to thank everybody for giving us the opportunity to celebrate and for me to present a tribute to Godfrey Hounsfield. I'd like to thank EMI for the permission to use the material that I've been using, and also to thank the BIR for their support. If you're looking at the picture here with Godfrey behind the cage, well, that's another story. And to learn about that and many other stories that there are about Godfrey, then you may just have to take the opportunity of reading the book which the BIR has published as a tribute to Godfrey. Thank you.